I like working with the spiritual community, but I also feel like a really heavy need to help like a past version of myself, which would be the kid that like didn't know it was possible for me to get here where I am. And I had to do all this research. And now I have this podcast where I can help a past version of myself without making it seem like really hard or really difficult, where it's just you're listening to these people who've done it and it doesn't seem so impossible anymore.
I'm Dr. Williams, and this is my podcast. I have 2 graduate degrees in psychology, am a licensed mental health counselor, and an expert in the area of spirituality. I am devoted to living my best life and am sharing it with all of you. I'm bringing my expertise, education, and life experiences to you through this podcast. Everyone deserves to enjoy life, and that is what I'm here to talk about. Depression, anxiety, grief, you name it, we all go through it at one time or another. I believe there's a better way to come at these things than mainstream mental health care offers, and I'm here to offer you my perspective and dig into discovering how you can feel good no matter what life throws at you. It is my intention to contribute goodness to this world, and the content herein is how I do that. But one disclaimer before we dive in: should you decide to apply the information offered here, be prepared for improvements in your life. You may even live happily ever after, and you'll only have yourself to thank. This is Feel Good Now, the Dr. Williams podcast. I'm here today with Kait Merriman, and she is the owner and founder of Kait Merriman Art. Kait also has been with me once before. We did a reading, and that's for a new podcast that's coming on down the way, so you can look forward to that. But today we're going to get to know Kait a little bit more and talk about her spiritual journey, her spiritual awakening, even at her very young age. Kait, can you go ahead and tell the audience who you are, what you do?
Yeah. So my name's Kait Merriman. I am the owner / CEO of Kait Merriman Art, which, I mean, it's just my name. It's a fancy way of saying I'm self-employed. I'm 23 years old and I am a graphic designer. I do a lot of brand design and brand strategy in like the spiritual space for service-based businesses. And I am also an illustrator.
So you mentioned to me in your notes that your spiritual awakening happened just a few years ago, around age 20.
Yeah. So I've always been kind of like leaned more spiritual. I come from a kind of religious family. My dad's more religious, I would say, like the religious one his side is. But I do kind of come from like a little bit of a religious background, like a Christian background. And it never fully resonated with me. Even as a child, it just didn't really sit right. So I've always kind of felt like I believed something different from other people. It wasn't until COVID, when we were all kind of forced to start working from home, that it really started to, like, I started to like actually fully awaken to like my personal beliefs.
I want to talk about that more. I just want to let everybody know, because when you and I had the phone conversation, that was one of my favorite things about what we talked about, because you have a very interesting experience with COVID. Now, it's a negative thing for so many, and I'm not trying to take away from that. There is a lot of negativity that came with COVID, but for you, it really channeled everything in the positive direction.
Yeah, I think so. I was super excited to work from home. I was at a corporate graphic design job at the time, like a big company, and I was commuting like 2 hours into the city every morning and then every night to get home, and I was so stressed. I hate driving. And I was so excited to work from home and not have to commute. And I thought it was going to be like a week off, not like off, but you know, like a week off from driving and stuff. So I was super excited. And then it ended up being like 2 years. So,
but also you did mention that you had this job and you kind of thought this was it for you. You were working at this company and you had your cubicle and you were content with that. And you thought, this is what I want to do forever.
Yeah. So in 2018, so I actually had like these big dreams of going to an art school. I've always been an artist my whole life. It's like my one thing that I feel like even despite being so young, I do feel like I'm an expert because I have stayed so committed to like putting in this like practice into art every single day of my life. So when I was in high school, I really wanted to go to like a fancy art school. I had like my dream school picked out. I applied, I got accepted with a huge scholarship, the biggest scholarship that they offered. And it still wasn't enough for me to be able to afford to go there. I didn't, when I applied for FAFSA and stuff, I didn't really, get any financial aid or anything. And I would have to get private loans. And without a cosigner, I couldn't get the loans because, I was 18. I didn't really have any credit built up yet. So I decided to work at a custom t-shirt shop. And that was my plan. I was going to work at a custom t-shirt shop. I was going to build my art portfolio through working there. And I was going to get a job at a big company as a graphic designer. And it worked out exactly how I planned it. After my plans fell through with art school, I went straight from high school to working full time as a graphic designer at a little print shop. And then I was able to build my portfolio, work at a big corporation as a graphic designer, a fancy corporate graphic designer. And that was literally my dream job.
And you just got there in a different way. I mean, you thought you were going to have to go to school and get the degree and then head that way, but you just kind of went around that and found it in a different way.
Yeah, I grew up, my dad's an artist, so I grew up around a lot of art people, and his friends, they had come from such diverse backgrounds. I always knew that like going to school, it wasn't like an end all be all. If I couldn't go to art school, I know as somebody who comes from a background full of artists that if I don't have the ability to go to school, I can still get there by just making sure my work is really, really good. Because as an artist, and this is for like any artist listening, right? If you have a really, really good portfolio and you can prove that you can do the job better than somebody who did go to school, they're still going to give you the job because they care about the work being good and not about, a piece of paper.
I feel like that applies with a lot of creativity, like the jobs that are in the creative realm. Like if you're a really good writer, you don't necessarily have to go to school for that. You just have to show that I'm a good writer. And that's the people that have those passions. A lot of them have that kind of story.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're working at this wonderful job. Now COVID hits.
Yeah. So COVID hit at the same week, I think, for everybody in March of 2020. And I remember I went into the office that day and everybody was so mad because all these other companies had already sent everybody home. And we were like, oh, they're not going to send us home. Like they're standing their ground on it. And then like 2 hours into the day, I don't know what his title was, but he was like over our whole office. He was like the highest up in the office. And he comes out and he's like, okay, we're going to have to go home. And everybody was like, well, for how long? And he was like, I don't know. And he was like, everybody needs to start, deciding if they're going to take their monitor home, if they're going to take this. And I'm sitting there thinking like, oh, it's going to be a week. I'm not going to take my monitor. And so a bunch of my coworkers were like renting stuff out. And I was just like, whatever, I'm just like going to leave because I don't want to rent anything out. Like I'm just taking my laptop. That's all I need. And so I went, and was working from home for a few days. And then it very quickly became apparent that this wasn't going to be like a 1 week thing. This was like indefinitely. It was very strange. So I actually moved twice during the initial COVID. I moved immediately after at the end of March because as I was working from home, my roommates who I was living with at the time were so loud that I could not work from home. So I moved in with my boyfriend and then we moved together in June of 2020. So we moved twice. But during that time, I had so much extra free time because I wasn't spending 3 hours a day in the car anymore, sitting in bumper to bumper traffic trying to get into the city. So,
oh my gosh, that's awful. That's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a bunch of free time and I was using it. And I think the way that everybody else was using the internet at the time for everything, because we couldn't really go anywhere. I live in Florida. So we had like a lockdown, maybe 2 lockdowns, but it wasn't like it was in other places. It was not strict at all the entire time, but it was still like we all had to work from home and precautions and stuff like that. So I used a lot of that time to go on TikTok and like make internet friends since we couldn't talk to people in person really at all. I'm definitely, this is weird as an artist, people think of like introverted people. I'm very much an extrovert and I have to talk to people. It's like my thing. I love talking to people, especially strangers. And so I needed to get that somewhere else, even though it's funny, at my job, I did not talk to anybody because it just, I don't know, thinking back on it, I don't feel like I was ever really meant to be there for long. I think it was just kind of for the experience, but I wasn't really meant to make connections there because that would have made leaving a lot harder for me. So I didn't really talk to anybody at my job. I was so focused on like being the best that I could be at that job that I just worked constantly. But I still felt like I needed to make connections outside of, you know, like my normal day to day. And so I turned to like TikTok, mostly TikTok.
So now you're searching, right? You're searching for your people. What kind of people are you searching for?
I don't know. It was interesting. So around the initial like hit of COVID, and I was just on my phone so much more than I was like, I remember too, because you know how iPhone tells you like your screen time. Before COVID hit, maybe an hour of screen time a day on my phone, if even that. I mean, obviously I was on my laptop all the time working, but after COVID, I spent so much more time on my phone, and TikTok has this insane algorithm and it'll show you things that you were interested in that you didn't even know you were interested in. And so I started seeing stuff come up on like the spiritual side of TikTok, like spiritual people talking about their beliefs and talking about other things. And I met this woman who's literally changed my life. Her name is Janice. I don't know if I pronounced her last name right. But one of her TikToks came up on my For You page, and I left like just like a nice comment. I said like your energy is like so like warm and fuzzy and fluffy, because like I didn't know this at the time. Like I am a big like energy reader for people. Like I can tap into people's energy really, really easily. And I was just like, your energy is like so healing. And she responded to me and she was like, that's so nice of you. I'm actually a Reiki master, so that's probably what you're picking up on. And I was like, that is so freaking cool. And she was looking at my account and she was like, oh, you're a graphic designer. Can I like hire you to design me a logo? And I was like, of course. And so we got on a phone call and she was like, yeah, maybe we could do a trade of services. I could give you some readings and then you could, you know, design the logo for my business. And I was like, that sounds amazing. And we became really good friends. And she is definitely one of the biggest influences I had on like my spiritual path. And I just met her on a whim online.
Wow.
On TikTok. Yeah.
That's amazing. And are you still in contact with her? Like, do you talk to her regularly?
Yeah, we're friends. And it's funny because a lot of the people that I meet online, like they're not people who you would expect like a 23-year-old girl to like be friends with. But it's so interesting because I feel like a lot of like connecting with people based on like age and, you know, similar things, like it all kind of goes out the window when you're in like the spiritual space. You can kind of connect with almost anybody. But yeah, Jenna, she just opened a new business called The Spot. If anybody is near Salida, Colorado, she just opened it up. It's going to be so cool. I am doing the whole brand design for that business. So that's her third business that she'll be opening, and the second business that I've done the design work for of hers.
Wow, this relationship is really a cornerstone for you at this point. I mean, there's a lot of entanglement with her in a lot of ways. And so this was somebody you were really meant to meet.
Yeah, we have like past life history together. She actually, when we first met, she was actually studying to kind of learn how to go into the Akashic records. And I wanted her to go into my records. And it was just so like mind blowing. And she didn't even tell me at the time, but months later we were having a conversation about it. And she was like, oh yeah, like you were younger than me in that past life too. I've always been kind of like a guide, like mom figure to you in our past lives. And I'm like, I don't know why it doesn't shock me that like we have that kind of connection, because immediately, like even from TikTok, we picked up on it. So, but it was really, really, really cool.
Isn't this so much fun to listen to this conversation? This could be you. Do you guys want to be on the show? If you do, go to drwilliamspodcast.com and go to my scheduling calendar and set up a free 30-minute pre-interview call. You have something to say. We all do. So if you want to be a guest on the show, set up the time so that we can talk about it and see if we can formulate an episode around what you have to share about your unique perspective on life. For now, we'll just get back to this interview. Okay, so I'm curious about this. So this was kind of your doorway into your own spiritual awakening, and what kind of was a diversion from where you thought your life was going. And now all of a sudden you find yourself shifting to another path. Now, do you think that because she was involved in spirituality and you felt that connection with her, that that's what kind of catapulted it? Or the other way around, where it was your spirituality that led you to her?
I think it was a little bit of both. Even like knowing now, like, obviously, I think that, and this is just my personal belief, but I think that most of the really important people in your life are people who you have had past lives with and have had, know to have promoted your spiritual growth. Because obviously, why would you incarnate with these people again and again and again if they weren't helping, even if it doesn't feel like it? Because sometimes people are lessons and it doesn't feel good, but that's just how I feel about everybody. And with Jenna, she just really helped me a lot in a lot of different ways. And I would have said that she was crazy if when I first met her, she was like, oh, we've had a past life together. But I don't think either of us really realized it until after she had gone into my records. And even then, like, she's channeling. She doesn't remember anything she's saying. So it wasn't until we had like a later on conversation about it where she was like, oh, yeah, that life. And I was like, oh, my goodness.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really special. That's awesome. Okay, so at this point now you're realizing that you have a resonance with the spiritual community and it kind of lit you up and you wanted to start pursuing that more.
Yeah. So I feel like, and I think I'm still, I feel like I'm starting to come out of this phase of my life. Well, maybe never, honestly, the type of person I am. But I was going to say, I'm kind of at that point, especially like in 2020 into 2021, when I was like really starting to like awaken to this path that I knew I was on. It was like a phase of trial and error, I want to say, but not really error, because I feel like I would have had to try a lot of the things that I tried out in order to figure out like what I'm meant to be doing. Just because, you know, like how if you have an idea for something, but if you don't do it, you're always going to like wonder. I had a lot of ideas and like I'm under the belief that like I don't want to sit and just wonder about it. So I'm just going to do it. Like that's my Aries rising in me. I'm just like, I'm just going to do it. And we'll see. And if it doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out and I can try something else. And so I was trying a lot of things. I met a lot of different people in between like now and 2020. So I met Jenna. I had an astrology podcast with someone previously, which it doesn't exist anymore, but I did do that after I started my art podcast, which is still going strong.
And what is that? Can you tell everybody what that one is?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I'm the host of a podcast called Artwise. It's an art industry podcast. And I started it in 2020 right along with my spiritual awakening because I had all that free time, like I was saying, and I had years previously at my old jobs, like as a graphic designer, you're sitting there and your ears are empty. So I would listen to podcasts all the time. And I wanted so badly to find a podcast about the art industry that was just kind of chatty and like not scripted or like too history heavy. It was just like fun and light to listen to. And I could not find one for years. So I just made one and it's still going strong.
Is that how a lot of your inspiration happens? That you're kind of seeking something and then you're like, well, it's not there, so I might as well just create it.
Yeah, that's exactly pretty much everything I make. That's how it comes to be.
Wow, that's an awesome process. And do you have a lot of other connections in the art world? I can see where spirituality and the spiritual community would what's the word I'm looking for, would interact a lot with the art community. I feel like a lot of artists are into their spirituality and their growth, but do you find those connections, or are you more one way or the other?
I definitely feel like I'm both. I try really hard because my brand design business that I have doing brand design and strategy, I love working with spiritual people because I feel like I understand them in a way that a non-spiritual brand designer could not being involved in that community. And so having those clients who are, have spiritual based businesses like astrologers, Reiki masters, like you name it, in the spiritual community with service based businesses, I feel like if you're working with someone who doesn't truly understand what you're doing, it can be a lot more difficult than it needs to be. So I do have a lot of connections in the spiritual space, but I have a ton of art connections as well, probably a little bit more art connections than in the spiritual space. I'd love to change that, which is why I'm here. But I definitely know a ton of artists. My TikTok account that I have, I just hit 9,000 followers on TikTok, which I'm like so stoked on because I've been trying so hard to like gain like a community in the art space because I like working with the spiritual community, but I also feel like a really heavy need to help like a past version of myself, which would be the kid that like didn't know it was possible for me to get here where I am. And I had to do all this research. And now I have this podcast where I can help a past version of myself without making it seem like really hard or really difficult, where it's just you're listening to these people who've done it and it doesn't seem so impossible anymore.
Yeah. I was getting this feeling. So you talked about how when you first saw Jenna's TikTok, you felt her energy.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me if this rings true for you. But we've been talking a lot about the art community and the spiritual community. Since you have that ability, I feel like that would apply to anybody. That if you can tap into their energy, they wouldn't necessarily have to be in the art community or the spiritual community. You could probably design something for them. I'm thinking more logo design, just businesses in general. Anybody that's listening that's kind of looking for a graphic designer, you probably could tap into that energy no matter what. Is that true?
Yeah. I can, and it's not even always intentional. When I'm in a crowded space, it's something I actively kind of have to try and turn off. I have not mastered this yet. This isn't even something that I realized that I could do until I was, talking to other people and Jenna about it and realizing it's not like a normal thing to like talk to someone and be like, you feel like really like warm and fuzzy, or like you're nervous right now. Like, it's something I didn't really realize I've done my whole life. But it's not, I don't really know how to categorize it yet. It could be like an empathic thing. I just know kind of like what people feel like. Like if you put me in a room with a blindfold, I could probably tell you like who was in the room, like by feeling their energy. But it's interesting, and it's something I'm working on strengthening too.
Is it easier to do it when you're in person with somebody, or does it not make a difference? Like, can you sense my energy right now?
Yeah. I think in person, it's almost nauseating in person. It's why, and this is something, I think I might have talked to you about this on the last episode we recorded with human design, but, it's part of my human design and my, as a projector, like the type of aura that I have, like the absorbing aura that I have to kind of be able to do that. So that's kind of how I justify having it, is through human design. But in my human design type, I'm a 4/6 projector. And 4/6 types are really sensitive to energy around them. And we do a lot better like in like these types of settings where it's not in person, because in person it's it's crazy. Like I always, and you'll
Overwhelming.
see people ask me, it is overwhelming. Yeah. And on my social media, I usually I'm like veiling with something, like I'll wear like a hat or some kind of a headwear, because I get really bad migraines. And it wasn't until my spiritual awakening that I started to put it together. Like, oh, when I go out to a crowded place with lots of people, like I almost always come back with a headache. And so like I do like wear hats or like a hood, like I'll have like a hoodie up and like I'll try to like veil. And I think a lot of people who are sensitive do that without even realizing what they're doing. Like my boyfriend always does, like wears his hoodie up or is wearing some type of hat, and he's very sensitive. And until he met me, he was just like, oh, I just like feel better when I'm wearing a hat. And I'm like, okay.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I'm never going to look at somebody wearing a hat the same way again. My oldest, he wears a hat almost every day. And I would say that he's definitely more sensitive than my younger one. So that was very insightful for me to know.
Yeah, it's a great way to protect your energy too, because it can be, if you're going somewhere like convention centers, like I love going to conventions too, but I almost always leave with a headache because I'm just like, oh my goodness, like this is a lot. But over Zoom, over TikTok, especially one-on-one, I'm totally fine. But if I'm in like a crowded space, it's very overwhelming.
Wow, that's amazing. So what kind of feeling do you get from me?
You have a very healing energy to you. It's the same kind of, I think healers all have a similar, it's like warm and fuzzy, kind of like what Jenna has. I've noticed a lot of people who are or have worked in like in psychology or have that background have a very similar kind of, it's hard to describe. It's like, it's warm and fuzzy is like the best descriptor, because Jenna also, she has a psychology background as well. So I feel like a lot of people who go into professions where they are healers have a similar, it's like a healer energy. That's how I describe it.
Wow. You guys, isn't that cool? Like, wouldn't you want to work with Kait just to kind of get the sense of how she gets this read on you? And it's just so interesting to me to get your perspective. Like, now I really want to see what you would like design for me, like, you know, based on that, because I can see where that would have a lot of power and resonance for somebody who's looking for somebody to design a logo or any kind of illustrative work that you do, because it's really, you're pulling from that person and putting and creating it and showing it in picture form. That's really, really wonderful. I think it's great what you do. So let's take a couple minutes and let people know how they can find you in case they do want to reach out and have you do some work with them.
Yeah. So my website is katemerrimanart.com. And my handles on everything from like Instagram to TikTok to Twitter is Kait Merriman Art. My name with art at the end, no spaces or underscores or anything like that. You can also check out the podcast called Artwise Podcast. It's Art-Wise on everything. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, everywhere.
And I know, you did the reading for me and you guys haven't heard it yet, but when you do, she says in there, well, I don't really feel like I should be doing these readings yet because, and you gave a reason. Did it have something to do with Saturn? What did you say?
My Saturn return. So I feel like it's hard for me to give, spiritual guidance or advice. I feel like it's something I shouldn't be doing until I'm further along on my own path. And one of the biggest hurdles that I think people have to overcome where their life just completely changes is their Saturn return, which usually happens from between like 27 at the earliest to like early 30s, like 31, 32. So it'll usually happen in that time frame. I think I will be 29 for my Saturn return. Since I haven't gone through, because that's like the biggest, astrologers will tell you, it's like one of the biggest kind of like initial hurdles that you have to get over, like to kind of enter into like adulthood. Having not experienced that yet, I don't want to be giving people any sort of spiritual advice or like any sort of readings or anything, especially not for profit, when I feel like I am just not an expert yet. And I want to be an expert. I'm still continuing to, study my, astrology and like my spiritual interests. And I read so many books, like every single day. I love books. But I just I don't feel fully equipped to give the type of like quality information to people at the age that I'm at. I just don't feel like I'm far enough along on my journey yet.
Well, and I feel honored that you did that for me, even though you're in that place. And well, maybe we'll have to do it again once you've experienced that and see if there's any kind of difference. But it's obvious that you have a lot of potential, and there's wonderful things that you're doing in life. And we're all excited to see where you take it. I really appreciate you being here and speaking with all of us and sharing who you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That concludes this episode, but if you don't want to wait for the next episode to come out, I have more for you at drwilliamspodcast.com. You can learn more about me and my journey to podcasting, find all the ways to connect with me on social media, and there's a button to subscribe so you're the first to know what's new and upcoming. You also can shoot me an email at hello@drwilliamspodcast.com. You are so special to me, and your support does not go unnoticed. I want to support you too. This podcast is my outlet for growth, because when you teach something, you hold yourself accountable and apply the information in life. But the inspiration for these episodes comes in a variety of ways, and one of those is through you. I want you to feel like this is your show too. So send me a message and let me know which episode is your favorite and why. And tell me if there's a topic you'd want to hear me talk about. Your feedback applies to so many people, and your suggestion could change someone's life for the better. The best way to do this is by subscribing to the show and leaving a review through your favorite podcast platform. I really listen to you guys, and this dialogue feeds my soul. You say that you're a fan of me, but truth be told, I am a fan of yours. Everything is working out for each of us, and we're all in this together.